So it seems that Robert Fitzgerald Kennedy Jr. has been making the rounds, especially in the Libertarian circles, and also making some noise in the Democratic circle. He's running as a Democrat. But some of his views have been controversial over the years, controversial enough to cause a stir, not just in the Democratic elect circles, but also in the Libertarian and Republican, as well as other third-party circles as well. This guy's been quite popular last year, but there has been some problems, and a couple of his views, which I'm going to be playing today, has cause for concern. They're going to be the same old stuff that we've heard before, and especially when it comes to foreign policy. Look, domestic issues, everyone's all over the place. Everybody wants to hear what they want to hear, not what they need to hear. And with politicians, it's usually they tell you what you want to hear, not what you need to hear. Not the case with Robert Fitzgerald Kennedy. Some of his views actually are needed to be heard. However, the views I'll be playing today is views that are wanting to be heard by elsewhere, not here in the States, except for the few influential members. And you can always gauge where a person's at, not when it comes to domestic issues, but when it comes to foreign policy and, of course, war. So in this clip I'm going to be playing today, I'm going to be playing a clip between Robert Fitzgerald Kennedy Jr. and the controversial Israeli Rabbi Shmuley Boteach. I became fully aware of Boteach many years prior because I used to be a Christopher Hitchens follower and used to watch him debate. And Hitchens used to rip him to shreds. I think he's debated him like 3 times. It's not even close. So without further ado, this is the interview. I'm not going to be playing all of it. I edited some, and this is about maybe 15 minutes long. I only wanted to talk about certain issues and not everything. But as you can see, it gets right off quick.
Are you a friend of the Jewish community?
Yeah, I don't think, well, I can tell you there's nobody who's running for president right now in either party who will be a better friend to Israel than me as president, and nobody who will articulate the moral case for Israel with the same erudition or the same persuasive power as me, because I believe it in my heart. It's core to the values that I was raised with. My father was a key commitment of my father during his lifetime, to President Kennedy, to my uncle Teddy, who played such a key role in assisting the Soviet Jewry to leave the Soviet Union during the 1980s, to get to the United States and safe harbors in Israel. And that friendship with Israel and making the case, or the moral case for Israel, will be a key part of my presidency. I want to say this. You know, I've watched something very disturbing in the Democratic Party, Rabbi, and in the generation of my children are very well educated, and they went to, good universities, and I see now this narrative taking place that portrays Israel as an oppressive nation, and the Palestinians as the impressed indigenous group, and the narrative flows from that this is an apartheid state, etc. There's very, very little truth in that depiction, because there's no contact with history. There's no context. There's no understanding about the huge efforts that Israel has made to settle a peace, and the unprecedented efforts that Israel makes to avoid civilian casualties when its adversaries actually target civilians. What happened in the Jenin camp last week was truly extraordinary, where Israel once again put the lives of IDF forces at risk to go into dangerous areas, into bomb factories, to make sure, when they could instead do what the Russians did, what the US would do under the same circumstances, which is to drop explosives so that not to put troops at risk. But the IDF does something no army in the world does, which is to go into those areas and put Israeli soldiers at risk in order to avoid civilian casualties. And this is a message that's not getting out to the world. It's a message that I intend as president and as a candidate during the next 18 months to try to bring the Democratic Party back to its traditional support of Israel, and to explain to my children's generation the historical context and the moral case for Israel.
Okay, that was
Okay, so let's touch on this subject here, because this is the most ridiculous, made by Robert Fitzgerald Kennedy Jr. And wow, where do we start? So I mean, the history between, I'm not going to go through the whole history. So the history between Palestine and Israel basically goes back to, let's keep it recent, the Nakba. The Nakba is also known as the disaster, the Palestinian catastrophe, which was the destruction of the Palestinian society and homeland in 1948. In which, if you read from Hanan Ashrawi, which she made an address to the World Conference Against Racism in August of 2001. She related that the term Nakba was used to describe the events of 1948 and the ongoing occupation of the Palestinians in the territories West Bank and Gaza Strip, as well as their persecution and displacement, the razing of the houses, the destroying of crops, the poisoning of the water, the destruction of Palestinian homes and replacing them with Israeli settler ones. And then you had the Intifada, the Second Intifada. The Second Intifada actually was recorded through the Goldstone Report, in which the Second Intifada is generally the trigger for the unrest that was speculated to have centered on the failure of the Clinton-led, the Clinton-led Camp David summit, in which was that accord was expected to reach a final agreement of July of 2001 between Yasser Arafat of the PLO and, of course, Ehud Barak, the Prime Minister of Israel. And in September of 2000, Ariel Sharon, the Prime Minister of Israel, the opposition leader, made a visit to the Temple Mount, in which the visit itself was peaceful, but sparked protests and riots that the Israeli police started using live rounds on the Palestinians. Keeping it recent, and follow-up was the Goldstone Report, which stated that Israel overreacted. In other words, if a Palestinian shoots a rocket into an Israeli neighborhood, what the Israeli military will do is they'll overreact, and they'll just say, this is a Hamas rocket. We're using IDF forces and local police to disquell it, and by shooting, either illegal substance like white phosphorus or, shoot 10,000 bullets into a neighborhood, they'll overreact. But the defense response, and they'll use the media to do this, not just the American media, but the global media, in which they have a very big influence on, they will say that they're only defending themselves. See, this rocket came from a house, and the house is linked to a Hamas operative, even though Palestinian houses are usually under threat, not just from Israel, but also from Hamas and groups like the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. What are they going to do? They have no standing military. So the military for the Palestinians are, regretfully, these Gulish Salafi groups, which are basically could easily be destroyed by Israel, but Israel can't destroy them, because if they destroy Israel, they destroy Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, how can they attack the Palestinians in general? They need them to basically use as the defense for saying that we're defending ourselves. You understand? It's not hard to destroy Hamas or Palestinian Islamic Jihad. It's rather easy. Just like if the United States in the year 2001 wanted to destroy bin Laden, Al-Qaeda, and Taliban, they could have under Operation Jawbreaker. I've done a lot of videos on this. I've read the book, which was written by Gary Bernstein. Please read it, where they had Al-Qaeda and the Taliban basically almost totally destroyed, but they were allowed to live. Bin Laden escaped. For the next 10 years, he lived in Pakistan, keeping the threat of Al-Qaeda alive. Bin Laden is dead now. The threat of al-Qaeda is basically now centralized in North Africa or in the Arabian Peninsula. They're no longer a global threat, right? So, and now the Taliban's regrouping. Why? Because the United States didn't destroy the Taliban in the 20 years they were there. Why couldn't they? Because we may need the Taliban 20 years from now when we have to invade Afghanistan again. You see, war was never meant to be won. It was meant to be continuous. What can RFK Jr. say? If he basically told Shmuley Boteach, basically says, no, I don't agree with what's going on in Israel. No, I think the Israeli government is abhorrent in using excessive force against a people that has no standing military to defend against the military. No, I'm against the racially segregated checkpoints. No, I'm against the raising of houses. I'm against all this. Well, that's the end of Robert Fitzgerald Kennedy Jr. He will no longer be popular. He will no longer be in the race, and that'll be the end of him. And that's the reason why the Democrat and Republicans, there is no difference when it comes to the greater, bigger issues of foreign policy and war. There is no left and right. There never was. There is just one centralized institution of power. There is only a Democrat, there is only a Republican when it comes to domestic issues like education, sexism, Social Security, all healthcare, myriad of things that will always do one thing: keep you, the American people, divided. The Democrats will make you believe that they're for progressive values. The Republican Party will make you believe they're for conservative values. They're corporate whores. In other words, they sold themselves out for either the Pentagon or the military-industrial complex, or to major corporations who have a lot more money than me and you do, or to foreign lobbyists like Israel or Saudi Arabia or the Gulf, who have a lot more influence and power than we do, okay? The Congress that you people vote for, I don't vote, you people vote for, you are telling them, don't change anything. And just like under Obama, when he ran for hope and change, nothing was hopeful, nothing changed. And when Trump came along, he basically said, I'm going to pull the curtain back and show you how government is run. And then you demonized him as a disgusting reprobate, in which he is. He's an egomaniac. He's a narcissist, probably a sexual deviant, and nothing really changed. Yeah, he didn't start a new war. He just continued the old ones. Now we have Biden, who basically is a mummy at this point, who basically ran on when he told a bunch of his donor classes that nothing will ever fundamentally change. Has it? Nothing. In fact, no new jobs are created. Oh, yeah, the silly idea that jobs have created under Biden more so than any other president. Hey, guess what? Those jobs were taken away from you once they implemented those COVID mandates, which started under Trump, just extended under Biden. And then when the jobs opened up, he basically said to the Department of oh, goodness gracious, the employment division basically reported back to him and said, oh, these are all new jobs. No, you're getting some of those jobs back when he helped to close them in the first place. There's more homelessness than there was under Obama. I mean, homelessness was on the rise under the Trump administration. Now it's skyrocketing under the Biden administration because of the COVID lockdowns. It was meant to destroy the business class. That's why we're having a business recession, which is currently underway. It won't be felt for the next 2 years, but it will be. In fact, I live in New York. I see what New York City looks like. Look at Louis Rossman's channel. Louis Rossman lives in downtown Manhattan, and he is basically going down each lower Manhattan street, the Lower East Side, showing you the complete desolation and destruction of New York City businesses. I can only imagine what cities like Detroit and Los Angeles and Houston all look like too. This is a big issue. And the issue is that Robert Fitzgerald Kennedy Jr. has to appease the one lobby that basically needs to be on your side in order for you to gain to the highest positions of government institutional power. Without them, you have no chance, no choice, right? Okay, let's see what else is here.
Unbelievable what you just said. And you're right, the world did not focus on it. Israel went into Jenin. They didn't use drones. Israel is one of the most technologically sophisticated military in the world. And they neutralized, at least temporarily, a terrorist threat. And they only...
Just to add to this, right? Jenin is a refugee camp. A military went into a refugee camp, a small area, which is like a concentration camp, just without the constant tortures and death threats, but similar to one, where they have a military and a local police basically giving brutal orders to people and making them go through these racially segregated checkpoints, always using the defense. They are terrorists. There's Hamas, there's the Palestinian Islam Jihad, and they basically are attacking Israel. I wonder why. I wonder why. You know, it's not like terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda, Abu Sayyaf in the Philippines, right? Or Jemaah Islamiyah in Indonesia, or the Islamic State in North Africa, right? And they basically don't just come out and just attack you. They tell you. You know, I did a video recently where I said, you know, one peculiar thing about Salafi fundamentalist groups is that through my years of studying true crime and psychology of sociopaths and radical fundamentalists, is that radical fundamentalists, unlike La Cosa Nostra, which is the Italian mafia, or any type of organized crime, Islamic fundamentalists will tell you why they're attacking you. That's not usually the case with crimes, violent crimes, like serial killers or the mafia. Islamic fundamentalists are usually more prolific. They're sociable. They're basically make videos. They'll tell you, about our attacks. They'll even give you a whole diatribe. Hell, they'll even give you a video, a 30-minute video. Martyrdom videos. I mean, these people, they'll kill themselves before, and when they kill themselves, they usually release the videos and say, well, this is the reason why we're doing it. Almost none of those videos talk about Western style of dress. Almost none of those videos talk about how haram, which is being against, how haram music is. It's never about the style. It's always centered around foreign policy. And because we have two major countries that dictate our foreign policy, Saudi Arabia and Israel, Saudi Arabia, and I'm talking about the Gulf, that's United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, right? And you have other countries like Egypt, right? It's a major player. But Israel and Saudi Arabia are the major institutions when it comes to foreign policy. No other country on earth has more power than them two when it comes to foreign policy. Israel usually has influence because they don't have any money, they're poor. They have influence regarding Congress or how we think in universities, because we have smaller Zionist organizations monitoring these institutions, seeing where we're at. Is there any dissent? And they crush it right away. With Saudi Arabia, we have nothing in common with them. They dole out billions of dollars. In fact, Saudi Arabia buys more military-grade equipment from the United States than any country on the face of the earth. So, and plus, you know, we have oil deals with Saudi Arabia, so there's that too. We buy more oil from them than any other country on earth on a discount. In other words, we similarly regulate to it, not totally. But yeah, I find it funny that Boteach is saying that, oh yeah, we quelled the threat in Jenin. Yeah, huge threat when you don't have a standing military to defeat a military.
Killed 12 militants.
Right. I mean, this whole issue. Listen, I don't. This whole issue of defending yourself goes out the window when your enemy, your preconceived one anyway, is not really able to defend itself. I mean, I don't get it with you people. It just
and no civilians. So thank you for saying that, Bobby. So you're a defender of Israel. You're a champion of Israel. You wrote an incredible article in the Jewish Journal about why you support Israel. You marched at the Israel Day Parade. But most importantly for American Jewry, with Iran threatening a genocide of the Jewish people, you actually came out publicly recently against President Biden's new plan for an Iran deal, where he's already had Iraq release $2.5 billion to Iran, which will be, money's all fungible. It'll be used to murder people. They are terrorists. They slaughter their own women for not covering their head. They hang LGBTQ Iranians from cranes in public squares. You came out against that Iran deal, and Iran threatens Israel and the Jewish people with a second Holocaust and destruction and annihilation.
And let me say one other thing. You mentioned LGBTQ. 2 weeks ago, there was a parade, a pride parade in Israel with 150,000 people in it. And at the same time, this year we see the Iranian government right next door hanging gays from cherry pickers in public squares. If you're a woman, if you're a gay, and if you're a Palestinian, you have much more rights in Israel than you do in any of the neighboring countries. If you're a Palestinian and you are a dissident, you want to criticize your government, the best place to do that, the safest place to do that in the Mideast is in Israel. So Israel is not a perfect democracy any more than America is a perfect democracy. Israel has to cope with something that no other democracy has to cope with, which is being surrounded by hostile territories, by hostile people who have pledged themselves to the genocide of the Jewish people. The huge difference between the way Israel conducts itself, the civilized and moral case for Israel, is the way it conducts itself in wartime, of always targeting military targets when it's surrounded by enemies who have pledged themselves and who consistently target civilian targets as civilians, just people who happen to be Jewish, as legitimate military targets. And in fact, the PA, Hamas, compensate people for killing Jewish civilians. That's something, and yet, despite all of these terrible, terrible security threats, which any other nation would turn any other nation into a totalitarian regime, Israel has steadfastly preserved itself as this oasis of democracy, of compassion, in the midst of a sea of totalitarianism and tyranny. So, that's something, that is a portrait that is true, that is accurate, and that the world needs to know about.
Well, those powerful words.
Okay, let me stop right there, because I think, wow, again, another point when it comes to Iran, Israel, and the United States, is that this is a one-sided deal, right? Iran and the United States have no diplomatic relations since 1980, and that is when Ruhollah Khomeini took over and deposed the Shah of Iran, Reza Pahlavi, who was Western-backed. In fact, in 1953, this is historical. This is a historical fact. Through the public record, the United States, through the CIA, forced the push out of Mohammad Mossadegh from power, and in replace of him, the Iranians basically voted in for Reza Pahlavi, who's Western-backed. There's been a lot of dissidents within the country, and then in 1980, of course, after the bread riots and after economic dissolution of certain Iranians, they had enough. In fact, the religious sector took over, and this was a key period. 1979, 1980 was the key period in showing that the Cold War was over and that the new power, the new threat, was radical fundamentalism. It's not that the United States create these groups. They facilitate them. For example, there is no Al-Qaeda or there is no Islamic State, that there is no Abu Sayyaf, or these ghoulish Wahhabi groups. There is no threat of religious fundamentalism before 1979. They've always been there, but they've been subjugated by certain tyrannical socialist leaders like Assad or Gamal Abdel Nasser in Egypt. And what happens is there's always a plus and minus. No government is perfect, as Robert Fitzgerald Kennedy says, but some countries are more abhorrent than others. Okay. During the 1960s, 1950s, the Middle East period at this time is going through an Arab nationalism period of time. They were growing relations with other countries like Germany and France and Russia, Soviet Union, and the United States even, in the areas of trade. In countries like Syria and Egypt and Afghanistan and Jordan and Lebanon and these and Libya, these countries were enjoying the fruits of the labor under these governments, these socialist governments, who basically were subjugating the lower classes. No country in this period of time was more repressive to the lower class than Egypt. Egypt has a class warfare system that goes back even 100 years under King Farouk II. And I think it still even is prevalent today. But it's more so now that these countries went through a renaissance, 2 renaissance periods. Arab nationalism, which transferred over to radical fundamentalism. The countries that didn't have radical fundamentalist views or groups basically are now, 20 years ago, were rife with them. Egypt with the Islamic Jihad and Gamma Islamiyah, Syria, which used to have the growing threat of the Islamic State in Levant, Jordan, same thing, Libya, the Islamic State in Levant, and Al Qaeda, Boko Haram in Libya, I mean in Sudan and Congo, just goodness gracious, all these countries, Afghanistan, which we have now, the Taliban, so all these countries didn't have these problems. It was through a renaissance of corruption, a renaissance of U.S. interference. And when you have a war, which the Soviet Union tried to expand into Afghanistan to try to reach the Caspian Sea, north of Iran, to basically regulate the world oil, the United States saw this as competing power to them. And what did they do? Well, they gave these radical fundamentalists, called the Mujahideen, and there's 2 sections of them, the Arabs and the Afghans, they gave them weapons and training, knowing full well, I think they knew full well, that by doing so, we will create a new enemy. So in other words, they didn't create Al Qaeda, they didn't create Taliban, they didn't create these groups. They basically gave them what they needed in order for them to expand. And they did. And for the next 15 years, radical fundamental was the replacement of the enemy, which was the Cold War. Now, radical fundamentalism doesn't exist. Guess what? Hey, we're talking about Iran. We're talking about Russia. We're talking about North Korea. We're talking about China. We're going right back to 1970, 1980 Cold War period. Meanwhile, guess who's growing in Afghanistan bigger than they ever been before? The Taliban. Oh, didn't we leave billions of dollars of weapons aid in Afghanistan while we left out the country? Yeah, the Biden administration did that. So this whole issue of Iran and Israel is basically an Israeli problem because it's Israel who went to the United Nations. It was Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu who put these cardboard cutouts, just like Colin Powell did at the United Nations in 2002 or 3, and basically had these cartoons of these big caves and all the elaborate stuff they're doing in these caves. They never existed. Cartoons was used to pretext for war. Well, Netanyahu did the same thing. He had this cardboard cutout of Iran is building a nuclear bomb. Meanwhile, there's no nuclear bombs being built in Iran because the IAEA, the International Atomic Agency, goes and vets these people every year. And they have reports. It's in the public record no nuclear bombs are being built. And I think Iran would be suicidal if they didn't. Look what happened to Afghanistan. Look what happened to Iraq. Look what happened to Libya. Look what happened to Syria. These are Arab countries that don't have nuclear weapons. You know what countries do have nuclear weapons and we don't mess with? Pakistan. We don't mess with Saudi Arabia because they're an ally. In fact, Shmuley Boteach, the ghoul that he is, basically says Iran's the leading terrorist state. Meanwhile, the Wahhabist ideology isn't from Iran. Iran's basically fighting that Wahhabi ideology in Syria. While the United States basically gives them weapons and training through a CIA program called Timber Sycamore. Hey, fun to have war on terrorism, right? At the same time, you have Israeli leaders and religious ghouls like Rabbi Shmuley Boteach basically purporting the lie, just like our congressman like Tim Cotton basically says Iran's the leading exporter of terrorism in the world. They wouldn't dare say it's Saudi Arabia because Saudi Arabia will say, you know what, we've had enough of you, United States. You know what, Great Britain, how would you like to buy oil on the dollar? Hey, Russia, how would you like to buy oil on the dollar? China, how would you? Guess what? The United States are on the outs, and now we have to use our own oil, which we have plenty of. The reason why we basically similarly regulate the oil in Saudi Arabia is because we give them military protection, and also they buy weapons from us, and also we get the barrel on the dollar, a cheap price. If some competing power does that, then we have to fight that competing power, which we're doing so now, because Saudi Arabia is growing a better relationship with who? China. Who's calling for the China war? Well, the Tucker Carlsons, the Jesse Kellys, the Megyn Kellys, the Alex Jones, all these ghoulish Republican right-wing fundamentalists. And who do they have on their side? Christian evangelicals. The largest Zionist lobby in the world is the Christian evangelical. And who are they protecting? Israel. So Iran poses zero threat to Israel. They pose zero threat to anybody in the world. And guess what? Where do most of the world's Jews live besides Israel and the United States? 10% of the world Jewry lives in Iran. He won't tell you that. In fact, yeah, Iran has a repressive religious identity, right? But without that, Israel has no compulsion to attack Iran or ask the United States to attack them because Israel doesn't use their military because they're weak. They don't know how to fight. And to give proof of that, in 2006, they lost to Hezbollah in Lebanon. Yeah, if the Israeli military can't beat an apolitical group in Lebanon, you think they're going to fight a standing army? They suck. They don't know how to fight. They know how to use espionage and covert operations, sneak, right? That's what they're about. So the problem with Israel is that you are led by a repressive Zionist government, and the Israeli citizenry know it, and they are protesting against it. Thousands, tens of thousands of people had enough. Let's start good relations in the Middle East for goodness sakes. Get rid of Netanyahu. He should be at The Hague for war crimes, crimes against humanity, crimes of aggression, genocide. But when you have people like Boteach and sellouts like Robert Fitzgerald Kennedy Jr., they'll say anything to appease Israel, we have no chance at hegemony. So it's up to us, the people, to speak out against this. Stop voting. What the fuck are you voting for? You ever sat back and said, well, what the hell is this person talking about? How does his identity influence me for the better? If you live in New York, I did a post on Twitter basically, showing through evidence that an average one-bedroom rent in New York is $3,000. The city, New York City. $3,000. Now, minimum wage ranging anywhere between 17 to 20, depends what. Still nowhere near enough. There's people living with people. Like in Japan, where they have these cubicles, they're living in cubicles, living in, game rooms. That's not, that's really happening. And that's going to happen here. And without with the job loss from COVID restrictions, who do you think is buying up these properties? It ain't the citizenry, it's the bankers. And then you have these, gross taxes for, housing prices and housing taxes, especially in Long Island, in Suffolk County. The tax are through. It's amazing. You could barely live here. Things are not getting better. The inflation has not dropped. And as soon as you ask for a raise and say, listen, I think we need $25 an hour at McDonald's. Oh, yeah, okay, yeah, we'll give it to you. In fact, they'll implement it, then fire half the staff and basically say, hey, yeah, well, we're going to have AI or robots do your job. Save us money from giving you health care and a raise. Until you start protesting in the streets about better ways of living and stop all this divisive nonsense with this stupid arguments of sexism and religion and racism, which has no bearing on your life whatsoever, things are going to gradually get worse. And by the time your kids realize it, it's because of your paralyzation to act on this issue and other issues that affect the daily life of American people. The problem's only going to get worse. And if you have kids and you're not doing anything about it, well, then I have no compassion for you. You're telling your kids, yeah, I didn't do anything, but the problem's made it worse. And you're probably saying to yourself, well, it's only me. And yeah, it's easy for me to say because I'm armchair quarterbacking, but I'm trying to give a little bit of motivation to somebody. I'm not a big channel, but a little bit of motivation in the hopes that I could create a chain reaction. I got to believe this or else would stop me from shooting myself in the head, right? I wish more people would become a little bit more proactive. That's what I'm saying. Let's continue.
That you're saying, of course, echo the incredible legacy of your father, who was one of Israel's greatest champions. He was murdered by Sirhan, a Palestinian, because of his support for Israel. Sirhan had a list of leading American personalities, from Bobby Kennedy, Arthur Goldberg, the American ambassador to the UN under Lyndon Johnson, was next on that list, former Supreme Court justice. So we know the price that your family has paid for support for Israel. Let me just move on for a moment. So here you are articulating incredible support for Israel. You're polling at about 20% or higher, 23% in some polls in the Democratic primary. This is a party that has been seen of late. It was once the greatest champions of Israel, like your uncle, who moved away from the Republican policies of President Eisenhower, who kind of was, Dwight David Eisenhower was kind of shocking in that he had witnessed the decimation of Jews in the Second World War. He led so ably, and he actually went to the concentration camps, and he ordered American photographers from the military to take pictures. And yet when it came to Israel, he was barely a supporter. He put phenomenal pressure on Israel in 1956 to withdraw from the Sinai campaign, etc. Your uncle reversed all that. Your uncle began to establish the American relationship with Israel following President Truman. Then you, of course, had your father running in 1968, cut down by an assassin's bullet, a Palestinian gunman. But the Democratic Party, Scoop Jackson, your uncle, Teddy Kennedy, is kind of moving away from that, at least as seen by the American Jewish community. And we have people like Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar. Ilhan Omar just announced that she won't even go to the speech by the President of the United States, by the President of Israel, Isaac Herzog, this coming Tuesday to a joint session of Congress. Isaac Herzog was the leader of a left of center party for many years. He's seen as a left of center. Of course, he's not partisan as president, but he was always a left of center politician. I know him. He's a very decent man. Ilhan Omar has already announced she's not going. And these are leading lights of the Democratic Party today, Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, who are openly anti-Semitic. I mean, do you want to address that for a moment, please?
And by the way, I know you don't believe, and I don't believe, that criticizing Israel makes somebody anti-Semitic. But I'll tell you what does make you anti-Semitic. If you're criticizing Israel and using a different standard to judge other governments and other people, and that is revealing of something insidious. And unfortunately, the individuals that you talk about do that. They use a different standard for Israel than they do to judge the neighboring countries and to judge almost any country in the world. And so that is not an unbiased view. That is a biased view, and that bias is called bigotry.
Bigotry and anti-Semitism. That's an
Okay, well, you know what? Let me address this. This has been a one-way street regarding criticizing Israeli government and criticizing any other government in the world. When you criticize Israel, you are demonized as an anti-Semite, no matter what. Even if you're criticizing, say, Saudi Arabia or Pakistan. As soon as you criticize Israel, the Zionist lobbies, like the American Zionist Organization or these smaller Zionist groups that exist inside the United States, they'll come right out. J Street, for another example. They'll come right out and basically demonize you until your reputation is so sorely destroyed, you are no longer credited or respected, or that you can no longer legitimately run for any areas of Congress. You'll get no support, even from your own party. And this is because of the fear of being demonized by one of the most powerful lobbies in the world, which is the American Israeli Public Affairs, the American Zionist, the American Israeli Public Affairs Committee, right? AIPAC. AIPAC is a lobbying division of the American Zionist Council. It was founded in 1953, in which at the same time, the FBI wanted to, was pressuring the State Department to label the American Zionist Organization and AIPAC, later AIPAC, as a foreign institution, foreign entity, in which the State Department under Eisenhower neglected to act on. They grew in the 1960s, 1980s under the shadows, and as soon as they got situated, established in the United States after the 80s, AIPAC really took off in the 90s under the Clinton administration specifically. The Bush family were not friends of Israel as they were friends to the Gulf. However, that all changed because once the American Israeli lobby grew in the 1990s, it was basically accelerating at a fast pace and started to basically shape American foreign policy when you had dual Israeli citizens in positions of power that started under the Reagan administration, but really took over in the Bush administration, and they were called the neocons. People like Richard Pearl, Dov Zakheim, neocons that favored Israel, like Paul Wolfowitz, Douglas Feith, and of course Bush lackeys that would do anything for the dual Israeli citizens in Congress, like Condoleezza Rice, Colin Powell. This helped to shape foreign policy in the Middle East. And now with the establishment, the full lobby that now persuades not just the Republicans, but the Democrats, now they dictate what American foreign policy should look like. This is not American foreign policy solely. Now, Saudi Arabia, which also has immense power in U.S. Congress, well, they use money. So basically, you have two countries that basically persuade U.S. foreign policy dictated, like I said before. For Robert Fitzgerald Kennedy Jr., he has basically no standing when it comes to being a critical voice to Israel. Once he does that, he's finished. So basically, this is not Robert Fitzgerald Kennedy Jr. speaking. This is Boteach telling him, under careful observation, what he should be saying. Because if RFK Jr. basically told Boteach that, yes, I'm critical of these housing settlements in eastern Israel, and I'm against these racially segregated checkpoints, Boteach will use his influence, and the Israeli lobby will use their influence, and you will no longer hear Robert Fitzgerald Kennedy Jr. and his raspy voice. Because his thoughts doesn't matter. His opinions don't matter outside of Israel. When it comes to Israel, you will say what they want you to say. Because once you go against the grain, and once you start opining your true moral thoughts about what's going on and how you could fix this, you are no longer going to be situated in American politics. And I think that we have to basically speak out against this very influential and powerful lobby, which is Israel, and get them out of the United States. Get them out. They're a foreign institution. They have no bearing, no standing in American politics. We don't need them. Same for Saudi Arabia. So I'm not an anti-Semite, according to Shmuley Boteach, because I am critical of both. And you could just take one look at my channel and you'll see. But I'm proud to say that I will always stand against the Israeli government because they're every bit as immoral and criminal as Mohammed bin Salman or our own government, which I continually speak out against. So now it's up to us, the people, to speak out against criminality when we see it and report with due diligence and without bias and prejudice about what is happening. But the way I see it now, we need a hell of a lot more people to basically pull that proverbial IV out of our arm and basically say, I'm not playing this divisive game anymore, and speak out against criminality as we see it. And until we do that, nothing is ever going to change, and we will just gradually get worse and worse in time. All right, guys. See you in the next video. Have a good day.